Hello, my name is Jonathan Steele, coming to you through the Stable Podcast, and I want to welcome you to my show, Could You Be More Specific? And on this episode of Could You Be More Specific, we're going to talk about self-awareness and how you handle yourself, especially publicly. Now, I know the two most talked about incidents recently is what happened with the lady that made the call in Oakland about a barbecue, and also what happened with the guy at Starbucks with the comments he made towards a customer and an employee there and speaking Spanish. And you would think at this point, especially with where we're at now, since really 2010 or so, especially with Twitter and just beyond that point from there, that people would have an awareness about what they're doing and how they're conducting themselves publicly. In a weird way, it kind of forces you to be more so kind of like, not a robot, but you have to think 3 or 4 steps ahead about how you're talking, how you're conducting yourself publicly. In regards to the attorney, Aaron, I know I was watching a Hot 97 interview, and Ebro, when that guy was mentioned, was asked, do you think something's going to happen to that guy because he got kicked out of his law office? And is he the kind of person that, if you were to wake up and you heard something bad happen to him, or if he did something to yourself, would you be surprised? And he said no. In relation to that, I would tend to agree with that. That guy felt very confident and very comfortable saying the stuff that he was saying. And it's kind of odd, especially when you look at this guy's background. I don't want to get too much into him personally because I don't really want to attack him as a person. It's more so about what he did. There's not a place you can go in this country where a translator possibly isn't available to you, or you can at least make an effort to make that not an issue, but you can make that a suggestion in terms of how people are able to interact with someone. The fact that he felt that comfortable to start yelling at a manager about someone speaking in another language, it's just as surprising that you would think by him being a lawyer that he would do something like that. And when you hear about him being disbarred, I know there's going to be some people, especially people in the medium of right-wing politics, are like, hey, it's a free country and he should be allowed to say what he wants to say because he's a private citizen. Well, there's limitations on all freedoms, and for him, he's not an average private citizen. This man, took an oath to defend people and hold an oath under law. It's going to be very hard for him to practice no matter what field he's in, no matter what type of lawyer he's in. And he doesn't exercise that type of discretion and respect towards the people that he'll end up representing. It wouldn't matter if he just repped companies. That's a huge problem that he'll do something like that. And beyond that point, if you're a company, controversy is like the number one no-no in the game for the most part, depending on what field you're in. So for him to do what he did from a public standpoint, to make the comments that he made, and then he also, not only did he, make the racial slurs in terms of making that assessment on them, he talked about them from an economic standpoint, and he also talked about them in terms of ridiculing them overweight. So the guy doesn't draw a lot of sympathy, and nor should he, because if you're going to do that kind of stuff, you got to be prepared for what the outcome of that incident is going to be. So you running from TMZ doesn't exactly make people feel like, oh, well, this guy's really standing behind what he says. It lets you know that, he was okay in doing that because he felt like there wasn't going to be an audience on him and that it wasn't that big of a deal. And that's very troubling, that you would think, especially for someone in the field that he's in, that he will be more aware of that. And then transitioning from him to say what, the lady, what she said about the barbecue, what she kind of said is what I've been thinking about what Michael Eric Dyson said. It's like, it's not the act itself in terms of what scares certain people, especially when it comes to black people. It's just the idea of being black is a scary thing for the public. And that's not to say that, hey, black people don't, go through the same issues other communities go through. Because we all know that as human beings, we all got representation in no matter what life of work or family members, personality types. It covers all spectrums as human beings on what we're involved in. But for this particular lady in particular, for her to make the call that she made and to be in that much of an uproar about it, it's very bizarre, especially for someone that, comes from supposedly an affluent background. And the fact that she felt like that was that big of an issue to want to make that phone call just kind of like gives up a red flag about her in terms of, well, how many people have you been around at all socially? I won't even jump to color because I know her being a white woman, that element is there too. I don't want to get too much in a tangent about that, but it's this false like equivalency narrative that I think a lot of times happens where the struggle a lot of times white women, especially when it comes to interactions, it's nowhere near what a black man goes through. And I think I may have said this before on a previous pod for the people that have been listening. But what Dave Chappelle said in his comedy special was true when this one lady was, and she was white, was, trying to do a comparison of their plight about suffering. And he acknowledged that she does suffer. Just gender alone says she suffers. But when she tried to equate her suffering to black men, it's like, well, no. You don't suffer like that. You still suffer, but you don't suffer like that. In regards to pay, in regards to, there's no redlining preventing women from being able to buy homes in certain areas. Property value when you're someone of color and you decide to purchase a home in certain areas, it can drive property value down. That's not a made up trait. So I think that narrative and that equivalency is where you're off base. But for her, just I guess the idea of seeing that many black people in that closed of a space, even though it seemed like they had some room for sure, but the fact that it was a barbecue and she decided to make a call to the cop and, and I don't know who that cop is, but I'm pretty sure for him, he's probably thinking like, of all the distress calls I'm getting a call about a barbecue. This is what, you decided to waste taxpayer dollars on is a barbecue. You're not reporting a crime. And that's another thing for the police where I sympathize with them on some of that. They're really built and set up to handle conflict situations. And for the ones that still struggle with conflict situations, those are the police officers then obviously need more training and more work. But when you waste a police officer's time in making a phone call about a barbecue, because you see a group of black people that you've never seen before and that makes you nervous. Again, I think exposure has a lot to do with it. And the self-awareness of this particular individual comes into question a lot because being black, we're in rooms oftentimes where we're the only representative of our race in those rooms. But we've gotten so conditioned to adjust to it. It's not that big of a deal for us. And we can most of us handle ourselves very well, and we can put on many different sides and faces, which you kind of got to be able to adjust to. That's another part about being self-aware. The way you behave with your friends, you're not going to behave that way with your friend's family. If I was hanging out with a group of my friends and they're in their late 20s, early 30s, that's a lot different than how I'm going to behave around adults in their 50s and 60s. I have to have enough self-awareness to be like, hey, I can't talk exactly the same. I can still be in my same voice. It can still exhibit certain traits that are pleasant and that, can kind of grab and make someone who's around me in that age group feel comfortable. But to say that, I don't think about it at all. It's something that, hey, I'm just going to be myself at all times. It's like, that's not a realistic mindset or view in terms of how you're going to be able to move throughout the world. Like the way, for guys, the way we behave and talk in a barbershop, you're not going to be able to do that in a business meeting because everything that's a different environment. It's a different conversation. So those are just some of my points that I had on, in regards to that, especially with those two particular cases, because of how it's linked, because the fact that they happen in that close proximity of time, you think it would have helped her a lot more so. But I think it actually just magnifies the problem of the extremes, is that It don't really matter what you're doing if you're someone of color, or whether you're having a barbecue or you're just merely trying to translate a customer's order in the language that they are best suited to speak at the moment. It doesn't matter. It's still offensive to people. And by offensive to people, it's offensive, unfortunately, to white people. And again, like, it's not a bashing white people in general either. It's these particular cases. And they just magnify the things that are institutionally placed in our country from a society standpoint, that it really doesn't matter. The rules can be written up as they go. They can be interpreted as the way that they want them to go a lot of the time. It's like, if I'm in fear, or if I feel like I'm not comfortable with something, I have the right to voice it. Which, if you want to voice that, that's fine, but then it needs to be judged on the merit of it being voiced. And it's no different than someone of color who then makes that voice of what's going on with them. I saw this other comment from a self-awareness standpoint where this guy put out that white people or white men are the new N-words. And I'm thinking, like, really? Are most prisons filled with white men? Or are you guys being denied business loans and you have the same credit rating as someone that just got approved with somebody who's a different racial counterpoint than you? Do they sabotage your housing? Are you based off per dollar of work? Are you being shortchanged in that? And hey, it's okay to have that self-awareness in terms of all of us is something that we got to be aware of. Me as a black man, I'm very aware of what I'm going to more than likely be perceived when I'm out publicly. I just am. I'm living in a fantasy land if I don't think that way. And there's certain privileges to being a man overall. As primal and as kind of like, it sounds very, masculine, which I know that term has kind of been under attack lately, especially in this climate. But I'm well aware of, some of the things that I have the particular advantages of. Like, I've never walked out feeling like, hey, I'm going to be attacked by a group of people necessarily. And that's something that women have to worry about every day. Every day women do have to worry about that. This is not something that is just made up for kicks. So I get that. But one thing I've been consistent on throughout this pod, and I'm going to be consistent on, is that I'll never attack the individual. I'm just going to attack the merits of the argument. Because the arguments are if presented correctly, and they're not, and they're not changed and they're not skewed to try and fit someone's argument, you're just looking at the facts for yourself, it'll even itself out, no matter what category. And I think that's the thing that we kind of got to get to amongst everybody. But in terms of how we decide to interact with one another, self-awareness needs to become more and more important as we go along this thing. Those are just some of my thoughts that I had in regards to especially those two particular incidents. I want to thank everyone that's listened to this podcast. I'm looking forward to doing more. I want to thank D. Continue to support him. He's got more episodes coming up that he's actually putting up now. Catch him on the Rapture. He's still going forward with his doc series right now in terms of covering that. Looking forward to doing more of these. I definitely hope to maybe talk with some more people soon, especially on some more topics that I want to cover that I think will be really fascinating and interesting. So I want to thank you guys. My name is Jonathan Steele. Thank you for listening. Could you be more specific? And you guys have a good one.